This headline on the arrest of Derek Hutton, who is pictured along with Joe Anderson on Friday. This headline now, Derek Hutton arrested in council corruption probe, is not about any new or second arrest of Derek Hutton. It's about the same arrest on Friday. Now, there is a problem with this story about corruption because the evidence of the last, let's say, 70 years of the behavior of the police across England about corruption in councils and by councils shows that the police do not treat council corruption as corruption or a crime at all. And this piece, although it doesn't actually even indicate that the police are kind of doing a routine thing of performing a series of arrests, contains an item or a reference to Elliot Lawless. What a name. 32-year-old man called Lawless. Elliot Lawless, founder of Elliot Group and Liverpool Council's Director of Regeneration, Nick Kavanagh, 50, were arrested on suspicion of fraud last December. Neither was charged. That's the trick. So this is a kind of routine thing which may end up as being part of the propaganda to suggest to the gullibles that the police are treating corruption as a crime and corruption by councils as serious crimes. The investigation into the 1970s corruption in the northeast of England, Newcastle, and the John Paulson, and Reginald Maudling, the Conservative Home Secretary. The investigation was done by journalists, one journalist, or maybe two journalists. And no lesson has been learned about the extent of corruption that is done by and through the councils. And although Richard Morey, as the election commissioner who heard the petition that was formally submitted in June 2014 by 4 petitioners against the 22nd of May 2014 election to the directly elected mayor post. Although Richard Morey, said that he was ousting Lutfur Rahman for corruption, corrupt behavior, he did say the word corruption or the phrase corrupt behavior. Although he did say that, no corruption was investigated really by the police. And Morey actually published his judgment, so-called, on the 23rd of April 2015. So it's 5 years and 8 months since Morey described Lutfur Rahman's election in 2014 as corrupt and avoided it. Morey declared it as not having taken place at all because of corruption. And in the period, in the decades since, let's see if we can find the current entry on the internet about and this is completely stupid. Google doesn't even have a page on the book Nothing to Declare. Now, on this day, the BBC kind of has an entry about the 1974 jailing of architect John Paulson over corruption. Let's see what they're. So it says that architect, it is just a kind of copy of the BBC item at the time. So it says architect John Paulson has been jailed for 5 years for corruption after being found guilty of bribing public figures to win contracts. Paulson, spelled P-O-U-L-S for sugar, O-N. Paulson was found guilty of conspiracy to make or receive corrupt gifts, admitted that cash or presents worth £30,000, that's talking about 1974 prices, had changed hands but had denied corruption. Leeds Crown Court was told that the 63-year-old gave away more than £500,000 in suits, holidays, and flowers to win contracts. After Paulson's business collapsed in 1972, an investigation revealed it had been making payments to several MPs, police officers, health authorities, and civil servants. The Yorkshire architect was found guilty by the jury of 10 men and 2 women after 4 hours of deliberations following the trial. Now, Mr. Justice Walla told Leeds Crown Court there was a web of corruption that encompassed 23 local authorities and 300 individuals. Now there it is. 23 councils were in bold. Now that was only a tip of the iceberg because they were being referred to by the judge in relation to that case. But there is nothing in the kind of decades 74, 84, 94, 2004, 2014, that is 46 years ago, and no reference to the judge's reference to 300 individuals and 13 local councils has been made in any shape or form that I can access at this time. And the 4 people who actually were formally the signatories to the procedural petition that was submitted against Lutfur Rahman in June 2014, that is within weeks of the 22nd of May 2014 so-called election to the elected mayor post. The 4 persons, as far as can be found on the publicly accessible kind of sources, websites or otherwise, have not followed up in any campaigning form or shape any of the allegations that their petition contained against Lutfur Rahman's election. And in fact, 2 of the 4 have made contradictory statements since the judgment was published by Richard Morey on the 23rd of April 2015. Contradictory, all in context and all in relation to the corruption in Tower Hamlets Council. And one of these signatories, who has been given too much credit by Fleet Street for the petition, has been even supporting the current elected mayor, John Biggs, in an embarrassingly dedicated fashion, despite the fact that Biggs is on the record as having bribed effectively the newly kind of installed councillors after the May 2018 election to the council. Almost all of them, if not every single one of them, almost all of the councillors have been given pretexts as posts that they are holding in addition to being councillors, and in addition to being in receipt of the allowance connected with the being councillors, even when councillors don't have any membership of a committee or any of the other so-called responsibilities. So John Biggs's first task was to bribe almost all the councillors, and the bribery entails his giving them pretexts, and so that he could pay them extra money from the council's funds. And that bribery has been condemned as it happened, condemned even by the people who would not normally make comments. But that bribery has not been commented on or condemned by any of the 4 petitioners that have their name on the petition submitted against Lutfur Rahman in 2014. And the question that remains outstanding against and about the silence of these 4 petitioners about the corruption in Tower Hamlets Council in the last nearly 6 years, let's say, since Mori published his judgment, is this: why were they only concerned about that election of the 22nd of May 2014 if they have not been prepared to explain why they are silent on the ongoing corruption in Tower Hamlets Council since that time? Number one. The subsidiary question, which is the question that relates to the money that some of those petitioners have been claiming against Lutfur Rahman after the Richard Mori judgment, and based on the implications of the Richard Mori judgment, the costs. Now, Lutfur Rahman has made a number of procedural kind of stunts in order to avoid paying the cost that was awarded or were awarded against him, and other kind of financial matters. Lutfur Rahman went into liquidation. He became a bankrupt. Now that is a open kind of way to use the bankruptcy in order to avoid paying money that he owes. And Lutfur Rahman's property, several properties that Lutfur Rahman is known to have owned, have remained unexplained to this day. And Lutfur Rahman's decisions, as detailed in the admittedly incomplete Price Waterhouse and Cooper report into Tower Hamlets Council's grants and related decisions by the regime fronted by Lutfur Rahman, those decisions remain unaccounted for. Those decisions were wrong. And they have been criticized even by the Price Waterhouse Cooper. I say even by Price Waterhouse Cooper, because that kind of contract for investigation into Tower Hamlets Council's accounts was a procedural, bureaucratic thing. It was not an ethical, moral, or democratic or accountable exercise for the benefit of the electors, benefit of the community in Tower Hamlets, let alone for the benefit of the people that were denied service, that were lied to, that were lied against, or the crimes committed against various parties and persons in Tower Hamlets by the abuse of Tower Hamlets Council fronted by Lutfur Rahman over the 6 calendar years. So all of these are kind of brought into focus because of the use of the word corruption in the Daily Mail about the arrest of Derek Hatton and the arrest in December last year of the two named in the Daily Mail today, because they were arrested for corruption, but there were no charges were made against them. And as I said, the Paulson conviction was accompanied by a statement by the judge who said that 300 individuals were involved and 13 local councils were involved in the corruption. That was there as far back as 1974. That is 46 years ago. And 46 years later, this Derek Hatton and Joe Anderson being arrested and the word corruption being used sounds very hollow, because there is no kind of strain or line or narrative based on court cases, based on prosecutions in the last 46 years that points to any acceptable or reliable kind of assertion that in England, council corruption is treated as crime. It doesn't. It most certainly doesn't. And therefore, the case also in today's Daily Mail about yesterday's kind of update, if you like, of proceedings in the case of the ex-wife of the Russian billionaire Tatiana Ahmedova, who is reported by the Daily Mail as saying that her son is a compulsive liar. Now, these are the two cases, two types of cases. She can afford to buy the services of the High Court. And it seems very clear that what David Neuberger, the first president of the so-called Supreme Court, was saying, as reported by Martin Bentham in the London Evening, No Standards, in January 2017, that when Brexit was kind of completed, London had become the center of the world's customers who would flock to London and use the London courts for resolving their disputes. He was meaning, David Neuberger, was that English law did not exist to deal with corruption in England by councils in England, council leaders or mayors in England. That the only service as a court of law or as a series of courts of law that London or England post-Brexit would be usable for was for wealthy foreigners or people from abroad who had millions of pounds with which to buy the services of a prostituted court system. When Napoleon Bonaparte said that the English are a nation of shopkeepers, Could he be thinking about what David Neuberger was selling or offering? There is no crime of corruption by council. There hasn't been for 46 years. In fact, council corruption has been given the protection of the democratic level by the corrupt Tony Blair, allowing the imposition of elected mayor posts. And all evidence suggests that the latest arrests in Liverpool would not lead to any conviction or any serious kind of prosecution at all. In fact, the the massacre of the football fans from Liverpool in the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield has not been followed by any prosecution of anyone who is responsible for the crimes of the massacre. 30 years later, those victims of the massacre and their relations are still crying for, well, the surviving relations of the victims of the massacre of the 1989 Hillsborough massacre are nowhere near justice. And in the 30 years, there have been all kinds of charades, all kinds of staged inquiries. And if there is a lesson about inquiries by British agencies or institutions, that lesson is that inquiries should be treated, when set up by the government, inquiries should be treated as a cover-up, as a dressed-up cover-up as dressed up as an inquiry. It never produces justice, has not done so. So the crooks that have been given the license to embark on a career of council-based criminality, quote, thanks to Tony Blair, they can carry on the criminality and the crimes. Contrast that criminality and the license with the penalties being allowed to be imposed by the same corrupt councils against people who are framed by the council criminals, council post-holding criminals, framed for defaults, arrears, small amounts of payments, and denied service, that the local councils are in place to operate on behalf of the central government departments, especially so-called welfare, housing benefits. So we shall leave that corruption that is the culture of local councils legally kind of created the corruption industry. English council corruption industry created by Tony Blair as an additional kind of structure by foisting the elected mayor thing. And there is this Boris graph featuring the Boris photograph, that is staged photograph on Boris on the phone, not on a mobile but on a landline apparently. And he's given the credit for being on a mission to Brussels. Johnson is not on a mission to Brussels at all. It's a propaganda mission. And there is a name here among the bylines. So there are 3 byliners: Gordon Rayner, James Crisp, and Lucy Fisher. Now, Lucy Fisher used to be the defense correspondent at the Murdoch Times, so it doesn't say when she switched to the Boris graph. But in the context of our references to the council corruption, especially by the imposed mayors, elected mayors, Lucy Fisher is one of the Fleet Street names who published the same pack of lies about Newham in the run-up to the 2018 council mayor election in May 2018. And she followed up the election of Roxana Fias, or the final selection by the Labour Party of Roxana Fias as the candidate in the name of the Labour Party in Newham to stand for election as the elected mayor at the May 2018 election. Lucy Fisher and the ITB's London bulletin, as kind of presented by bulletin item, as presented by Simon Harris, claimed that Roxana Fias was a left-wing. They suggested the left-wing revolutionary candidate, supported vigorously by the Momentum outfit, and that she was a highly dedicated, that was the suggestion. I'm not quoting the exact words, but that is what they suggested, that Roxana Fias was a dedicated Corbynite. That was a pack of lies. Roxana Fias was never anything to do with Corbyn, except when it appeared to her that to mention herself in the context of Corbyn would be a career move, because she was considering that Corbyn would be the leader of the Labour Party for longer than he turned out to be. And she was thinking of Corbyn as the leader who would win an election, theoretically, general election, as the Labour Party leader, and end up in number 10 Downing Street. Roxana Fias has been a right-winger and has been linked with the UK central government operation on spying on the communities. She may have stopped banking on that, but she was recruited during Gordon Brown's kind of time as Prime Minister. And she was one of a list of, quote, Muslim women who were recruited to spy on the Muslim community on the assumption that the Muslim community had any role or involvement in doing things that radicalized Muslim community, other Muslims. The evidence is that there is no such thing as Muslim communities being involved in radicalizing anyone. When I say there is no evidence that the Muslim communities are involved in radicalizing anyone, I use the term anyone advisedly, and I shall elaborate on that and update on that in due course. Now, Lucy Fisher and Simon Harris and Paul Waugh and others in the mainstream and the Fleet Street were on a mission to tell lies, exaggerating the influence of the so-called momentum and the so-called Corbynites in Neom. And they in effect said that Roxana Fiaz was the front of a revolution, ultra-left takeover of Neom Council after Robin Wales was deselected in favor of Roxana Fiaz as the candidate. Lucy Fisher gave no evidence. Simon Harris gave no evidence. Paul Waugh gave no evidence because there was no evidence. But the line that they ran, or their pieces, their copies, their reports so-called, suggested that there had been a revolution. And they built up the image of Roxana Fiaz as a left-wing revolutionary. Only months later, after she got elected, she spoke to this reporter who has written a book about the 2012 so-called Olympic Games and the corruption in Neom Council connected with the Games. And in that book that he published, this one repeats the positive image of Roxana Fiaz as somebody who is campaigning to clean up Neom. She was not campaigning to clean up Neom at all. What Fiaz was doing and what she has been doing since 2018 has been to exploit the facts of Robin Wales's 16 years in the same post in order to paint herself as different from Robin Wales and as being engaged in cleaning up Neom. Roxana Fiaz is as undemocratic, as dishonest as Robin Wales was. And the fact that Robin Wales could stay in that corrupt and corrupting post of elected mayor for as long as 16 years uninterrupted shows just how corrupt Neom Labour Party has been and had been. They didn't take any action against him. They didn't make any statement against him. They did nothing against him at all until Corbyn appeared to be the leader of the Labour Party, and these so-called supporters of Corbyn began to murmur things against Robin Wales. And then they fizzled out. Since Roxana Fiaz got in May 2018, the same momentum supporting so-called Labour Party members have gone quiet. And there is no evidence that the all Labour Council in Newham is in a hurry to get rid of the elected mayor post. And there is no squeak of criticism by any of the so-called momentum supporting or Corbyn supporting members on the council now about any of the lies that Roxana Fias perpetrates every week. And Lucy Fisher, remember the Lucy Fisher name? That's where we came across her name. Her name is the last one on the list of the three so-called writers of this piece. How did she end up as defense correspondent or defense editor at the Rupert Murdoch Times? And the Times never explained, and nor has the Daily Boris Graph explained why they have recruited Lucy Fisher mysteriously. Why did she leave the Times? This question may never be answered. And they are speculating on the Boris Graph that Brexit may get undone. Remember what Johnson used as his kind of election assault, propaganda assault, of big lie. The big lie was that he was on a mission to get Brexit done. The phrase, the words, get Brexit done. It was never going to get done in the rosy, exaggerated way that he dishonestly confected the slogan to be. Either he confected it or one of his scripters did that. Doesn't matter, because it was a big lie. And here, in this exclusive diagnosis of the corrupt, the crooked Fleet Street, we reveal another prediction. Well, we update our prediction, because the European Union membership was to do with business, was to do with money, was to do with the access the UK businesses had to a favorable block of trading. The international treaty and the laws followed from that interest. And the nearer the date comes to the formal departure of the UK from the EU, the depth of the crisis that looms after the so-called departure date is emerging. And what will happen will be Brexit will be undone by the Brexiteers themselves. And this is the preparation by the Boris Graph, which is speculating that it will be another Maastricht treaty. Whatever the details, the facts are that the business interests, the economic interests of the UK businesses will take priority. And all these slogans that the Brexiteers lyingly perpetrated about the EU taking over the UK would be exposed to the gullibles for what they are, what they have been. In this confession by the Boris Graf, it's a piece by Harry York, who says, Ghosts of 90s mutiny against John Major stalk today's effort to win over skeptical Tory backbenchers. And the main headline here on page 6, under the banner of Brexit, is, will Prime Minister return with rebate-style victory, or will he be mired in a new Maastricht? Now, Maastricht is a reminder of the days of John Major and Margaret Thatcher and the kind of heat around the rebate and the Maastricht and all the other kind of business issues, economic issues concerning the UK's membership of the EU. And there is a completely criminally intended anti-French kind of piece on the page 19 of the Boris Graf. Emmanuel Macron puts arms sales above rights as he greets Egypt's Sisi, as if the UK is not doing the same. So Boris Graf is lying about the French quoting the Egyptian dictator and mass murderer for arms trade. The UK is doing the same things. And William Hague has got a piece which is headlined, The Heart of the Brexit Crisis is Our Love-Hate Relationship with France. That's a confession there. Remember what I said about Napoleon? And Napoleon I mentioned in discussing the prostitution of the English judicial bureaucracy. And I called it prostitution by entirely factually basing it on the pro-Brexiteering plug made by David Neuberger in January 2017, as reported by the so-called Evening Standard, No Standards, so-called Home Affairs editor, Martin Bentham. So the relationship between England and France is one of love-hate. That is the confession by William Hague. And the hatred of the French by the English and the hatred of the English by the French was summed up by Napoleon, who got most of his observations about, from his standpoint, the English correct, which is why they imprisoned him. And he died in prison. And that is not something that the French have forgotten. The treatment of Napoleon Bonaparte by the English. And the Guardian today is part of the same propaganda that is being fronted by the Boris Graf, by the Daily Mail. And they are on board, on the same wagon, claiming that Boris Johnson is the reasonable one. And they're painting Boris Johnson as the one that is working hard, very hard, to persuade the EU to behave reasonably and have a reasonable deal. Now that's a lie. And the Guardian is lying. And it's lying even more elaborately in that headline on the inside page, that he is the one who is trying to break the impasse. And there is a piece in the Guardian on page 6 saying that Britain will pay high price if Britain crashes out of the EU rather than with a deal. And Jessica Algott, in analysis on page 7, says that Starmer is going to come to the rescue of Johnson in the event of Conservative MPs opposing, some of the Conservative MPs opposing Johnson over the deal. And there is a kind of promotion of the mass murder of COVID-infected patients, disguised as a new development and the blood test. The Guardian is promoting that. And the Daily Mirror is doing the same thing of promoting Tina Turner on the top. And of course, it is marking the day, the first day of the mass vaccination. And it has got a pro Boris Johnson kind of line in the out page or whole paper today. And of course, the Beaverbrook poisonous legacy is blaming the EU for the showdown. And the Daily Star is a kind of joke newspaper. Of course, they're all jokes, but this one is even more of a joke today than it usually is. And the I newspaper is on the same bandwagon, giving Boris Johnson the credit. And the Financial Times calls it the trade impasse between the EU and the UK. And they got a front page Bob Dylan selling his songbook. We shall come to that sale in due course in the context of Tower Hamlets and the context of the criminality by Tower Hamlets Council. And the Sun is devoted to the promotion of Dr. Hrs Shukla, the 87-year-old Indian who is going to be doing the duty, and the vaccine. And the Times, of course, has got the same pair, Shukla and his wife, Ranjan. And the headline is, of course, Boris Johnson heads for Brexit showdown in Brussels. Boris Johnson is the one that is doing his best to avoid a no deal. Now, all these items that we have kind of covered in symbolic terms, in simple kind of references, constitute collectively the role of Fleet Street and the mainstream media in this country, lying to the people. As the Guardian has been promoting this blood test, I mean, this actually exposes the Guardian to the question as to why only the virus is being kind of reported on about the blood test. What are the details of the blood test in relation to other illnesses and conditions? And what are the findings of any research, if any, on the various diseases and illnesses in this country? Let's say the research that have been carried out over the last 75 years since the foundation of the National Health Service.